Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. But as always, Paul, hints of nostalgia. That's what we do. It's what we do here. We look lovingly back at our prime La Liga years with fondness. And last week we looked at Real Zaragoza. This week we're going as far away from Real Zaragoza as I think you can get, Paul, because we are looking at Japanese football players who've played in La Liga. Quite a niche subject.
It is, yeah. It's something different, isn't it? And we thought we'd try and explore different aspects to the wonderful tapestry of Spanish football. And, you know, we thought about players from different parts of the world that have brought something unique to Spanish football. And undoubtedly there's many countries that we could have chosen with, but we've gone with Japan to kick things off on what I think might be a bit of a recurring theme podcast-wise over the next, however many months, I guess.
Yeah, we're doing lots of mini-series within the series now, aren't we? I think that's how you could probably timestamp us. But I really like this because, again, it's not really a nation that you probably think of when it comes to Spanish football. You as we've done with some of our previous episodes, we've immediately been drawn to Argentina. We've been immediately drawn to the Brazilians, but Japan, not so much. And it's not because it's not a massive football country. In fact, it's probably the biggest football playing nation in Asia, maybe in competition with South Korea for that title at the moment. But they've certainly had their exports, not just to Spain, but also to Europe. And I know when I was growing up, and this was a long time ago, but I remember watching Inamoto firstly for Arsenal, and then he was at Fulham, and then I'm pretty sure he turned up at West Brom. I want to say he went on loan to Cardiff, but I might be wrong with that. And obviously, someone we'll probably talk about later, he mentioned Sunshuk Nakamura at Celtic. Always on FIFA 2003. Start with Celtic. You've got Nakamura in your team. You don't need any more. I used to spend hours practicing not only my Beckham free kicks, my Nakamura free kicks as well. He was absolutely incredible, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, there's dead ball specialist. But there's loads of, great Japanese players that have come to Europe, not just to Spain, but come to Europe. Obviously you've mentioned a few there. And there's Kagawa, who was obviously at Dortmund before he went to Manchester United. Some would say he didn't quite live up to expectations when he moved from Germany to England. But in Spain, there's been some absolute gems that I'd say as we get into it, there's a couple who maybe only had short spells in Spain, but had definitely had an impact, and players who created moments that as you say, as fans of the glory years of Spanish football, nostalgia merchants, or whatever people want to call us, they fit the bill, don't they? Some of these names that we're going to be going through tonight.
They do, and there's just something cool about them as well. Like, I don't know if it, like I say, you look at Japan as a culture, and how advanced the technologies are. You look at Tokyo as a city, and it's really, the biggest city, one of the biggest cities in the world, if not the biggest, thriving. You see it on television, and you're immediately drawn to what they do. And it's the same with the footballers as well. Like for me, especially around the 2008-2010 period, Kazuki Honda in that Adidas Japan kit was just peak. And when he signed for AC Milan, it was like all my fantasies on nostalgia had come true at once, because it was just brilliant to watch and to see. But again, focusing on the impact they've had in Spain, it's not a path well trodden. We'll have to admit that, but it's a path trodden either way as well. So we're going to talk about some of the Spanish players that did end up in the land of the rising sun later, but to focus on the ones that played in Spain first. There's only been 15 of them. We're not going to talk about all 15 today. We've created a select few, and there may be some honourable mentions. But the one I want to start with, Paul, is a chap who turned up in a very small town in the Basque Country. So again, you think about Japan and the powerhouse that they are, and as we said, Tokyo being this massive city. But then you think about Eibar as a town. We know how small and quaint and the impressiveness they were in the La Liga, being this small town club. For Takeshi Inui to turn up there as a star for not only the Japanese national team, but also, you know, made a name for himself in Germany. He must have been electric and very exciting for Eibar fans to watch at the time back in, I think it was 2015.
Yeah, it was 2015 when he joined, wasn't it? Yeah, if I'm right, I'm thinking as well. Was it a club record fee, about 300,000 euros, I think, which, you know, for Eibar back in 2015, it's not a small amount of money that at all. And like you say, he comes in. It's not quite a pioneer because obviously he's not the first Japanese player to come into La Liga, as we'll get onto a bit later on. But he had an edge to him that, you know, there was something in general. I mean, not just about his arrival, but he had something cool about him. You know, he was a player who had a bit of a spark, I'd say. But I remember him as also having a right good pair of lungs on him. You know, he would run and run and run, playing mostly in wide positions, but he just seemed to have a lot of energy as well. And his craft on the ball was great. You know, he becomes the first Japanese player to ever score against Barcelona when he gave them a shock lead. It gave Eibar a shock lead at the Camp Nou. Was it end 2017? I think it was May 2017.
Yeah.
He got 28 years old. He did. Yeah. He was about 28 years old at the time then. So it's not like he was, spring chicken or whatever. But he certainly had quality. I want to say as well, I think Ter Stegen was in goal that day. I think. Yeah, you know, he was obviously, at the time of recording, you know, he's still currently the Barcelona goalkeeper, although there's some, we're not a topical current affairs podcast, are we? But there's some suggestions that he may not be the Barcelona keeper for much longer or beyond the next season. We'll see.
With our nostalgia head on, obviously Wojciech Szczesny is in there now. Obviously, we could look back him fondly from his Arsenal Juventus days, but maybe for another podcast, looking at the biggest betrayals of Spanish football, Juan Garcia going to Barcelona from Espanyol after kissing the badge of all things, Paul. Could be a page in future years, but you know, certainly
we could definitely do best betrayals in Spanish football at some point, couldn't we? Another opportunity for us to, and it's another opportunity for us to mention an animal's head and a certain player, you know, which we've said before. Any chance we will bring that to the party, won't we?
We're gonna have to make that an El Partido story. That one, we'll just have to story tell that whole thing, and just with dramatic music, it'd be great. But
I was going to say, I think I'm going to have to ask you to rein me in a bit here because we're going off topic slightly. But back to Takeshi Inui.
What you're trying to say is Takeshi Inui is the Japanese Figo. I get it, Paul. You're trying to put this across to me. It's fine.
You know, he was impactful. You know, and he made headlines at the Camp Nou. Not unlike Figo. You know, the parallels end about there, don't they? But you know, he's somebody who, as well, if you think about it, I to go back to your initial point, talking about players coming from Japan and going to the Basque Country, and not just the Basque Country in general, but a very small place within the Basque Country. Culture shock that must have had on, you know, on in a way, you know, shouldn't be underestimated. But he settled in really quite well. You know, he was known to take part in some of the traditions of the local area. And I think it's fair to say that he quickly became a player that the fans had a great affection for.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that we've got to think about. You know, everyone will press home that Eibar is a very small place, but when you look at the Basque Country as a whole, especially some of the football clubs there, their dedication to playing, you know, homegrown players, especially Basque players, and promoting them, means that you wouldn't necessarily see too many players from, like, you know, the Far East turn out in their colours. And it must have been, like you say, a bit of a shock for Eibar to see this over years and years and years of promoting homegrown talent and Spanish football players. But as you said, he made an instant impact, scoring on his debut as well, which I don't know if you've seen the clip that was sent to us from The other Liam from the Spanish Segunda show, I think, sent it across to us. That opening goal, and it must be something in the water in Japan, because each of them has got like just a brilliant left or right foot where they can just bend it in from anywhere. And that's exactly what happened with this first goal. It just completely, wrong foots the goalkeeper and nestles itself in the top right-hand corner. They're just brilliant at it. I can't put my finger on why, but they just are. And as you said, I think from that moment in, everyone was bought into Inui and what he did. And obviously it wasn't his only stint in Spain for a Spanish football club. Obviously his his memorable goals and his impressive performances for Eibar earned him a move to Real Betis, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, he went to Betis. I can't recall if that is it's in between, isn't it? He has the two spells at Eibar. And if I'm right in thinking, so he's at Eibar, and then his final season in his first spell is out on loan. Is it at Deportivo Alaves? Then he gets the move to Betis before going back to Eibar. But sorry to interrupt you.
No, exactly. I knew there was a lineage of clubs in there, because again, going to Alaves is quite interesting, because he's gone down to out on loan to another club within the region. So I know that I can't quite remember if I think Alaves is in the Basque Country, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or close to the border with Navarre. So for him to go there, obviously, he impressed himself in there too. But then to get that move to Betis, again, going down to Seville, the city of football, and the culture down there is a real mixing pot. Some of the players you get from all over the world that turn up in Seville is absolutely brilliant. And dare I say, probably one of the first Japanese football players to appear for Real Betis as well. So he was quite a someone who broke the mold really for Spanish football. And obviously, we've spoken about popularity and marketing and things like that. And the big thing that came from Inui, especially with how well revered he was back in Japan, it brought Japanese attention back home to Eibar, to Alaves, to Real Betis as well, because he was like a marketing tool.
Yeah, 100%. And so to go from, to give the full sort of cycle of when he was there. So 2015 joins Eibar, leaves in 2018, which in the summer of 2018, everyone will remember, was also the World Cup, which was the one in Russia. He makes quite a splash there, really, for the Japanese national team. He definitely was a player that you heard talk about and was a key part of that team. A team that had the likes of Shinji Kagawa in it as well. I think Keisuke Honda was still up front, wasn't he, with his bleach blonde hair? I think he was still on the scene at that time. So he then makes the move to Betis before going back to Eibar. Like I say, I think if things were maybe different, if he'd have come to La Liga a bit younger, then perhaps his career in Spain may have reached even higher heights. But he scored around about 15 goals, I think, during his 3 or 4 year spell in La Liga. And I think I remember he always seemed to make the sort of the pre-assist, which is not really a stat that's collected, but he seemed to be the one who would start the move and maybe not get the actual assist or the goal, but he was always instrumental or always involved. Like I said at the start, I think he had a great pair of lungs on him. He was quite a workhorse, but he had a lot of energy and was a clever player as well.
I wanted before to call him like the Japanese Gareth Bale, because of his running, but I don't think he had the end product that Bale had. So I'm not sure
his pace was quite up there, but he was.
I know that he just loved bombing down the left hand. Maybe the Japanese Vicente or something like that could be the ultimate comparison. But I think he was industrious, like you say, and I think he brought an element of football to Eibar, which had never been seen in that small part of Spain before. And he obviously wasn't the the path maker for Japanese football players, but he's certainly a big part of that journey for people who want to look at the Liga and make that walk from Japan to Spanish football. A chap that you'll probably know a lot more about, especially being a Mallorca fan, Paul, is Yoshito Yakubo. And again, I apologise in advance if I'm butchering any of these names. I just about speak English. But, him turning up on the island of Mallorca in 2005, again, similar to Eibar, must have been quite strange. Mallorca is not a club that isn't, unknown to foreign players. Some of the foreign players that they've had have always been, high caliber and from all over the world. But, as far as Japanese players concerned, he was one of the first to arrive there, but he hasn't been the last either, which I suppose we must impose. But a great forward to appear for Mallorca at the time.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and it should be said, he comes in on loan originally. I think it's in the January of 2005, as you said there. So, like you mentioned, he's not the first Japanese player in La Liga, but there was still an excitement about his arrival. I'd say there was an element of caution, really, in terms of what to expect. But he definitely is somebody who made a contribution. I think it's only a handful of goals he gets. You'll probably have the stats in front of you, but I think it's probably no more than 5 in the league and maybe 1 in the Copa. But he became more of a player who I'd say was involved, but not. He wasn't prolific, obviously, as the stats tell you, but he didn't quite have the edge. But having said that, in 2005, Mallorca had no longer got the likes of Samuel Eto'o, maybe not as clinical in general, so I wouldn't put it all down to him. But certainly became a good squad player. I think he made nearly 40 appearances in the end because he stays the following season as well. Would say that, and I've already mentioned this on social media in conversation ahead of this episode going out, that Mallorca are currently the club in Spain with the most Japanese players to have appeared for the club, certainly in the first team level, with 4. And Yoshito Yakubo is the first Japanese player to complete a full season in La Liga of a 38-game season, I should say, or to be a part. He didn't feature in all of them, but he was present for the entirety of them. And he's somebody
like.
So,
what's that link like? 1 or 2, you could probably say, well, it's probably just candor, but to have 4, that you've got to think there's maybe a strategy behind it, or do Mallorca have a fantastic scout in Japan that's maybe looking for these players? Obviously, Akubo at the time when he was signed on loan from Cerezo Osaka, he's basically a 1 and 2 man. So again, it was a massive gamble, but he clearly shown how good he was back in his home country.
Yeah, so I would say one important thing to sort of distinguish about Mallorca, and yeah, it is, like you say, there's a bit of a, there's something about it, the fact that it's the club with the most, and 4 is, it's not necessarily a large amount, but in comparison to other clubs in Spain, it is the standout amount. And Mallorca in 2005 are a very different club to the Mallorca that signed Kubo on loan in 2019, which, to answer your point with Kubo especially, there was an element of, so the first and foremost, exceptional young player that needs minutes, and Mallorca think they can get him on an affordable rate and he could offer something. But with Kubo, there was the element of, or the commercial element that having him in the side can have. I wouldn't say that in 2005 when Okubu comes that there's the same conscious or deliberate attempts to commercialize the deal, because 2005 obviously there's no social media. It's It's a time when Spanish football is still on the basis of the teams negotiate their own television contracts. So it's not like it was the global brand. So I would say that in the case of Yoshito Okubo, that was more of a player recruited because he was a good player. Whereas later signings for Mallorca, obviously, first and foremost, excellent players that they've brought in. But it's no secret that after or in deciding to bring Kubo in, Mallorca consciously set up a Japanese channel to their social media handles. And they saw, in Spain now, through the era of YouTube, some clubs will broadcast their training sessions live on YouTube on their official channel, and the club found that they were getting a significant number of viewers from Japan on any content that they put out on social media that included Kubo, and obviously more recently they've signed Takuma Asano, who's there at the moment. I think there's an element of wanting to tap into the Asian market because La Liga is a global brand now. Mallorca under the American ownership are wanting to expand and that, but I wouldn't say that was the case in 2005. However, and I would also add that not only is it that when Kubo, because don't forget Kubo came back to Mallorca, was that 4 seasons ago? Had a less successful second loan spell, but was also playing in a team that had Kang In Lee, and Mallorca took advantage of his situation at Valencia to sign Kang In Lee, who obviously has just recently won the Champions League with PSG. He signed him knowing that he was a great player at an affordable price, but that he would also generate a lot of interest from South Korea. So there is that, and we shouldn't overlook that fact. But I don't think that it would be right for us to define these Japanese players on the basis of their commercial viability as such. However, it is a strange coincidence, as you say, that there's a larger number that Mallorca have signed over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think we'll come on to a player who played for Malaga shortly. Well, I say played. But as soon as that signing was made, they invented or created a Japanese Twitter account, and they were doing shirts with Japanese, letters on the back of them as well. So I see the appeal. I think, obviously, as far as Okubo is concerned, I think it generally was just taking a punt on, this lad has, scored a decent amount of goals in a short period of time for his home club. You look at his overall stats from, playing in the J League, and I think it's 235 goals in 580 games in Japan, which is no mean feat, isn't it? Like, say, that's a 1 in 2 player. So he seemed to definitely have got, the J League down, and he was, not as imperious with the Japanese national side, but again, there never really was anyone who was, an out-and-out goal scorer that way. But I think with Okubo, like you say, he wasn't the first, but he was one of the first that sort of like made people stand up and pay attention to as well. And I think, with the shoes he was intended to fill of Samuel Eto'o, then it maybe was the pressure that kind of got to him potentially. And when he went back to Japan, he again scored loads more goals and things like that too. So it's very, very interesting from an Okubo perspective, but obviously also even more interesting from a Mallorca perspective that, like you say, it's not loads, but 4 is probably more than a lot of other clubs, as you've mentioned, maybe with the exception of Celtic as of late, because obviously Celtic had the Big Ange effect, and he'd obviously managed in Japan as well. But as we said, he wasn't the first. The first goes to one player. And he'll always be the first who played in Spain. And it's not somebody who I know massive amounts about. I don't think anyone knows massive amounts about this gentleman, but it was Shoji Joe, who turned up in Valladolid in 1999. He was signed on loan from Yokohama Marinos. And the one thing I can take about this gentleman, Paul, is that when they printed his name on the back of that crisp, beautiful Kelme shirt that they had, they put this massive space in between the J and the O, just to make sure it lined up with the white stripes. I was just like, why did you do that?
Yeah, and I know you. We've shared that picture in the last few days on social media, and it is quite striking that they've done that. I mean, it just looks odd, doesn't it? I don't know. Maybe it was 1999, wasn't it? You know, maybe
It was a different
we're
time.
just maybe that was stylish, cutting edge. You know, he's also somebody who, you know, he was a pioneer. Like you say, he's the first Japanese player to play in La Liga. It's only a short stint he has, but it definitely is historic for the fact that he is the pioneer. But not just that. When he arrived in Spain, nearly a dozen or so Japanese journalists travelled with him to report back.
Wow.
Yeah, such was the deal. There's I think it's AS that have still got a couple of articles floating around about his time there, and the fact that it was that, you know, he arrived with, you know, essentially a football team's worth of journalists that were following his every move and writing articles and taking pictures and sending it back to Japan and reporting on how, you know, Japan's first export to Spain was getting on. I think he only got 2 goals, and if I'm right in thinking, they were both in the same game.
Yeah,
One was
I know his
against
time.
Oviedo, and I think that was where he gets his first goal. But I don't think he gets more than 1 or 2, and I'm fairly certain if he gets 2, it's definitely in the same game. I must
Well,
admit, I did have a look at his stats a couple of days ago, just as we were, you know, deciding on like the running order for this, and I have neglected to retain that bit of information with any detail of accuracy. But I'm fairly certain he only gets like 2 goals, and I'm sure they're both in that one game against Oviedo.
yeah, well, I think the problem that Shoji had is his time in Spain was curtailed by a pretty bad knee injury, which, like you say, when the hype comes around him and you think he only manages to get 15 games in a season, of which either side of a knee injury as well, you know, he did struggle to make that impact, like we say, but he'll always be the first. But again, he's another person who has been scouted out there for a reason as a prolific goal scorer. You know, he scored nearly 100 goals in 200 games in Japan, so he's somebody who they thought would be a difference. And this is at a time when Real Valladolid had just got back into La Liga and were looking to, you know, establish themselves in there as well. So it's a fair punt, to be fair, and you know, he'll always be the first. That's the big thing for Shoji Joe when he's talking to his kids or his grandkids, maybe now that he's 50 years old. You know, he'd be like, "Oh, I was the first Japanese footballer in Spain." He was probably one of the first Japanese football players in Europe. To be fair, going back to 1999, I can't name too many that would have been here ahead of him.
No, not in any league in Europe, actually. I'd love it if somebody could tell us. So if you're listening or you're watching this, let us know. I can't, and it's cheating to look up to Google it, isn't it? It's cheating to
it
check
is. We can't do
out.
that. But we are only honed into Spanish football, to be fair, Paul. We don't know anything that happens outside the borders of Iberia. So
exactly.
So
and although we do, do a bit of, you know, swatting up before we jump on and record this, you know, the whole thing is that this is a nostalgia podcast, so it's largely based on our biased opinions and memories of the glory years, and I think you know, proving that we're not infallible is a good thing. And if we just Googled it and read it off a script, it'd be quite boring, wouldn't it? It'd just be us stating facts. So quite happy to have knowledge gaps, and for the listener to tell us where we've gone wrong or to fill those gaps in for us.
Imagine the elation on your face if you were the listener who gets to go, actually, it was such and such a person who was the first Japanese player in Europe. There you go. There's that nugget. Yeah. I think that's us performing a service, Paul.
It is.
So, yes. Yeah, if you know anyone who predates Shoji Joe in European football, let us know. Sounds lovely. But yeah, he, like I say, wasn't around for a long time, but he was around for a good time. He must have enjoyed himself in Valladolid as well. Someone who made definitely a bigger impact in Spanish football. He technically had 3 clubs in Spain, but the first one technically doesn't count. And I am, of course, talking about surprise Premier League winner, Shinji Okazaki, who I think we all love. You know,
Yes.
I don't care if you're the most ardent Nottingham Forest fan in the world. We love Shinji Okazaki. Obviously, when he won the Premier League in 2016, I think it was 2017 with Leicester.
60,
he then has a couple of seasons after with the club, leaves on a free transfer and signs for Malaga. Big signing for Malaga. They go out of their way. They, as I've said before, they open up a Japanese Twitter account. They start to sell the shirts in La Rosaleda's club shop with Okazaki in Japanese on the back. It's big hype. He plays, I think, about 15 minutes of a friendly. And I tell you what, if you manage to get this 15 minutes on camera, you're probably one of the only few people that do. But he never actually played a competitive match for Malaga because, due to financial issues that Malaga were having at the time, obviously around Altani and them dropping out of La Liga and things like that, he doesn't actually register with the club and he becomes a free agent. He's available for nothing. So he must have been so confused about that, as were all Malaga fans as well, to be fair, thinking, oh, we've signed a Premier League winner here. This is great. This is something to be excited about. And then all of a sudden he fucks off. He can't play for him anymore.
Yeah. And I one bit of what I said before, we do a bit of research and we don't always retain all the information. I can definitely tell you that his contract with Malaga lasted no more than 34 days before it got cancelled. That is something that I do remember. I've got no notes. It's just it's all up here, so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a bit of knowledge that I have retained over the years.
Well, he, when that happened, and again, it must have been very confusing for him because, at the time, Okazaki wasn't just like somebody he wasn't a mercenary. He wasn't looking for somebody looking for a paycheck. He genuinely chosen Spain as an opportunity to go and, expand his portfolio of clubs. Let's not forget, he'd had a fantastic career in Germany. Obviously, his time with Leicester is legendary as, one of the main strikers that helped deliver the Premier League title in the most surprising of circumstances. But he chose to go to Spain because he really wanted to test himself in La Liga or in La Liga 2 as it was at this time. So then he's looking for another move and he ends up in Huesca, which I think of Huesca and I thought, Huesca, a pretty decent sized club, getting to La Liga, things like that. It was fine. He obviously helps him get to La Liga in his first season there. But Huesca is, again, very similar to Eibar. It's a very small town club, isn't it, in the grand scheme of things? So, again, the fact they've managed to get a Premier League title win on a free must have been quite surreal to Huesca fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say, I think I owe Huesca fans a little bit of an apology, actually, from the last episode we did with Liam, where... just to try and curry some favour with the Zaragoza faithful, I said jokingly, I want to emphasise I was joking, that if it wasn't for George Orwell, not many people would know about Huesca as a place. Obviously, that is not true, and I have a lot of respect for Huesca as a club and as a place. But it is a relatively small part of the Navarre region, and Okazaki going there, he has a great time. I think it works out quite well for him, doesn't he? I don't know if it's fair to say becomes a cult hero there during his short spell, but he helps them rise up from the Segunda up to the Primera. And if I'm right in thinking as well, he's not young at this point. He's in his 30s, isn't he? But he's like Takashi Inui, he's an absolute workhorse. He's playing up front, but he's got this proper fighting spirit, and we saw that at Leicester as well. He it's not quite a scrappy do sort of personality about him, but he's got a tenacity about his play, and it gets him goals. He earns pretty much every goal that he scores. And I think it's 12 goals in that promotion campaign, and
yeah.
can't remember if at the time Pablo Maffeo was playing with him at right back, but I know that they were playing in the same team the year after when they're in the Primera, and Maffeo is putting crosses in from the right back position, and Okazaki's, putting 4 of them over the bar or wide of the post, but the fifth one tends to go on target and that, and he, like, credit to him, because I do think he was probably about mid-30s at the time, so our age. Yeah. So really, that's young, but in football terms, it's quite old, isn't it?
Yes, it's very young, Paul. We all agree that it's quite young. He was, if anything, he was no far from over the hill. But like you say, and again, I think that's the thing with Okazaki, is he makes himself a cult hero based on not only his work rate in his industry, his goal scoring record is obviously pretty decent as well, but it's the fact that I don't want to say it's because he's from Japan, but it's part of his story, isn't it? He's someone who is trying to pioneer himself in all these different places. He's clearly got an appetite for going establishing new frontiers for Japanese footballers as well. And, his time with Huesca, getting them promoted in his first season showed everything that Malaga lost when they couldn't register him. Mm-hmm. Gets them promoted those 12 goals. He's not as prolific in La Liga in the second season, but he's still pretty decent in helping Huesca sort of establish themselves as a La Liga side. Obviously, after that, he ends up in Cartagena as well. So again, not giving up this ghost, he ends up down at the south coast of Spain, down in the Murcia region. Cartagena, fun club who have just come up from Primera as well the season before. And again, they've signed Shinji Okazaki. And one of the most heartbreaking moments I've got is in the season that Malaga got relegated from Segunda, is when he scored in the 94th minute to equalise for Cartagena. And it was double whammy, because it was like, this is what we could have had. Not that we would have had the aging Okazaki. He probably would have moved on by that point, but it was just like, here you go, boys. I'm back in town. I'm going to show you what I can do. I'm going to score in the last minute with a sublime overhead kick and completely fuck you up when you fight for surviving against relegation. Cheers, Shinji. Absolutely fantastic. But again, another brilliant player, to arrive in Spain, and such fun to watch as well.
I've got 2 points I want to say to you on that, actually. So you're right. And the way you've described that there, I would say that is pretty much how I remember him at Huesca and at Leicester as well. Not a great goal scorer, but a scorer of great goals or important goals. Certainly in the running for Leicester's promotion, and then their survival, and then their Premier League title as well. And Huesca's, because don't forget, when Huesca go up, they do it as champions. They win Segunda. It's not like they go up through second place. They win it. And obviously, important goal there for Cartagena. And one last thing, obviously, we said 34 days as a Malaga player. And I think I can probably name maybe another player who passed through Malaga and had an even shorter spell at another club before his contract was up. And because I'm only just trying to think, 34 days is nothing. It's got to be, there can't be many other players like that. But Martin de Michelis, when he leaves Malaga, he signs for Atletico Madrid for, I think it's about 3 million.
Yeah,
Like 12 days, he says that he got the photograph with the shirt and everything like that. About 12 days later, Manchester City come into Atletico Madrid and say, we'll give you 6 million for him. And he comes, he joins Pellegrini's men and wins the Premier League. But that's the only player I can think of that maybe had a shorter contract, from signing to it being cancelled in Spanish football terms anyway.
Yeah, at least Atletico Madrid got some money for him. Like I say, they doubled the cash, didn't they? Okazaki obviously came in at a free, but they must have paid him for a little while.
And then paid his cab fare from the airport, surely, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not that far from the airport to Malaga, so it probably was only like €12, but still,
they made a loss.
Yeah, exactly. It's cost them money to do so, but yeah, obviously a lot of fun. As with the last Japanese player we're going to talk to, you've already spoken about him already, and that is Take Kubo, who his story with Spain is just intertwined from youth, isn't it? You know, this is a player who has been, you know, identified as a talent, you know, way back in the day. He was invited to La Masia to have a trial with Barcelona, gets signed up, moves to Spain, you know, becomes a pretty decent prospect. You know, I think in his first full season at La Masia scores something mad like 70 odd goals in 30 games, where you're just thinking, right, this lad's the real deal. We've got the Japanese Messi here, which from a marketing perspective is like, fuck me, gold. And then all of a sudden he ends up back in Japan, and you're thinking, right, well, what's gone wrong here? You know, unlike the Messi track, where he's established himself as a fantastic youth prospect in Europe, he goes back to FC Tokyo and plays for their under-18 team. So you think, okay, right then, that's odd. Well, maybe you're just missing home. Here comes the kicker. He's back at FC Tokyo. He's played maybe like 20 games, something like that. In come Real Madrid. Now, is this Figo-esque, Paul? Is this betrayal on an unknown level, or is this just business as usual?
Some would say it was maybe an orchestrated move. Because he couldn't leave a Catalan club and go to Madrid directly, that there was an engineered exit for him that involved. I mean, that's what some people would say.
Yeah, no one on this podcast, like, for liability.
We're not in a position to cast aspersions or anything like that, are we? You know, we're merely admirers of Spanish football. We're not people who would say anything litigious. So
it's weird, though, isn't it? Like you
it
say,
is, yes.
You know, like you say, you don't score 70 odd goals for La Masia in 30 games, then Barcelona go, do you know what? We're going to send you back to Japan. Actually, we don't fancy anymore. Nah, give over. He could have been a lever in the Laporta machine at one point if they just kept him. Imagine how many Barcelona shirts he could have sold in Japan if Taki Kubo had actually made an appearance for the first team. Yeah, and I think that's a big reason why Real Madrid signed him as well. You know, I think we've obviously tried not to land on it too much, but it was a marketing thing because he was the Japanese Messi, wasn't he, at the time?
Yeah, absolutely huge. And I think, in a way, because of that and because of that excitement, it becomes a slight disappointment for some people in Madrid that he's allowed to go out on loan, and he goes out on loan to Mallorca. And I'd say, you know, it's the 2019-20 season, so Mallorca are, you know, they've just got promoted. They've it's a case of the squad's not great. It's still largely composed of players that have been with the club from the third tier, because don't forget it was back-to-back promotions, and it was promotion by beating Depor in the playoff final. So it was a very short transfer window. He goes to Mallorca, and let's be honest, he plays fantastic football, but there was no chance of him sticking around. Obviously, Mallorca end up relegated towards the back end of that season, but there was no chance of him sticking around at a team that would be in a relegation fight or mid-tier. He goes out on loan again, even though there were people in Madrid who were saying maybe he should be given a chance to at least do pre-season tour and have a go there. But he goes to Villarreal with the thought being that they're in Europe, maybe he'll be able to get a better level of exposure. The loan spell at Villarreal doesn't work out, so he's recalled in January, but I think he immediately goes back on loan to Getafe. This time I'm fairly certain this is still the Bordalas era. I don't think he's quite gone to Valencia yet, so it's not a team that you'd expect a player with the creative spark and the fluidity of Kubo to go and play for. That spell doesn't work out so great, but then he gets the opportunity to go back to Mallorca. And I know there's that whole saying of like, you shouldn't go back. His second spell isn't quite as effective as his first, but that's perhaps in part due to the fact that Mallorca had I'd say an improved squad the second time round, that he was competing with Kangin Lee and others for a spot, and then he gets a move to Real Sociedad, doesn't he? And he's currently there. He's been is it 3 years now, I think, since he moved there? Yeah, and he's been one of their best players pretty consistently, hasn't he? He's someone that there's Champions League clubs. I know, obviously, La Real have been in the Champions League recently, but they're not going to be this coming season. It's not been a surprise that we have seen the odd team linked with a move for him, but I think he's unlikely to move unless an extortionate amount of money is on the table. But there's room. Obviously, he's not. His time in Spain is not over, but there's certainly an argument to say he is Japan's most successful player in Spain.
Yeah, I think I would definitely say that, because even though he leaves Real Madrid without actually making an appearance for them at all, not even playing for Castilla, which is again quite odd given how young he was when he first signed to them. He really embodies that what they could have had if they would have just have left it for a little while. And I get at the time when he was there, he's competing with sort of like I'm pretty sure he just missed out on the back end of Cristiano Ronaldo, but there's certainly Gareth Bale there. You've got Karim Benzema up front. They go and splash the cash on, spend millions of pounds to get Vini Jr. out of Brazil and things like that as well. So, it's a competitive environment. But when he rocks up in Real Sociedad, it seems to be a bit of a match made in heaven, because they immediately seem to identify him as somebody who can perform at a high level and become, a massive influence on the club. And I think Real Sociedad as a team are brilliant at doing that, not just with transitioning their own players that come through their cantera to first team players. We look at Zubimendi at the moment, but we also look at what happened with Antoine Griezmann, for example, and others that have come through there as well. He just seemed to fit in perfectly. And again, his benefit for Real Sociedad goes beyond the pitch. There is no, rhyme or reason other than, Taki Kubo being a player for Real Sociedad, that they would do back-to-back tours to Japan at the end of, as part of their pre-season schedule. They're out there next month again, to go and play Sade. So, it's a really good, connection that the club have got with Japan. And obviously it all centers around this star, really. He is possibly one of the first, mega stars of football in Japan, even though we've had all those names we've mentioned beforehand, ones that have played for bigger clubs maybe, but he is the boy.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. And he's still young now. I think he will. I don't see him ending his career in Spain at Real Sociedad. I think there's every chance that he could end up getting picked up by another team relatively soon, and if not, I think it'll only either be one of the top 4 teams in Spain or a Premier League side that come after him. But I think he's got great potential.
I think Newcastle are quite strongly linked to him this summer. Obviously, there's an existing connection between the two clubs there, but yeah, he's a player who still has time on his side to go make an even bigger impact elsewhere if he wants to. And he's certainly someone that we'll definitely keep an eye on. Because he's so much fun to bloody watch. He's absolutely brilliant, and see how he gets on with the new manager this summer. We've spoken as well, obviously, that it's not just a one-way street, Paul, in terms of, Japanese players turn up in Spain. There was a surprising sort of turn of events, sort of from around 2018 onwards, where Spanish footballers started turning up in Japan. Now, the J League, as you mentioned, is possibly the biggest league for football in Asia. I know the CSL and South Korean football have probably tried to challenge it, but the J League's the one that we all know about. Remember Arsene Wenger being a manager for Yokohama. Remember Gary Lineker going out there as well, way a long time ago. But this influx of Spanish football players who started to turn up, and most of them played for the same club. So let's just get this on the table to begin with. Vissel Kobe in Japan started buying lots of Spanish players or getting Spanish players on free. Rakuten, which is a big Japanese company, also sponsored Barcelona. Add the two together and you get to the answer you need. So, Andres Iniesta is one of the first ones that we know moved over. We also saw, Sergei Samper move over at a young age to Vissel Kobe. We saw David Villa, Bohan, they all went over across to Vissel Kobe. Juan Mata played one game for Vissel Kobe before going off to Australia. Fernando Torres is the only one really of any note that went there. And he didn't sign for Vissel Kobe. He signed for Seigon Tosu. So, yeah, it's quite cool that these players went to the Far East rather than, retiring in the MLS or, getting what is the modern equivalent of a move to Saudi, maybe.
Yeah, it is. And, if you think about it, when Iniesta went there especially, it was a huge, story, wasn't it? Because it was, you kind of felt like he could carry on playing a top team in Europe if he really wanted to, but he had the opportunity to obviously go to Japan, and he's there for at least 5 years, I think. 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah, for a while.
It's not like a short stay, and he goes and we've seen those scenes of him his first game, and it's almost like he's treated like this not quite messiah, but it's huge the turnout just to see him perform there, and it raised. I think it's fair to say, without sounding condescending to the J League, because it's a league of its own right and deserves some respect, but he does help to raise the profile of the J League to a new audience. I think is a fair way of putting it to certainly to us in Europe. Gary Lineker will have done that, and I'm too young to have seen Gary Lineker play or like that, but I know that everyone remembers the fact that he went to Nagoya Grampus 8, and for me, Iniesta and Torres going over to Japan created headlines, and did make you think, what's going on there? And there's obviously, we've already said there's been some great exports from the Japanese football league to Europe, not just to La Liga. So it's only right that we see some going the other way. Some great imports from Spain, and that we've talked about that. What maybe a culture shock it would have been for, particularly Takashi Inui arriving in Eibar. I don't quite think for Andres Iniesta arriving in Japan that it would have been quite the same culture shock for him, in the sense that if anything, it would have been perhaps an upgrade. Barcelona's a beautiful modern city, very very cosmopolitan, and it's got a wonderful lifestyle and everything. But Japan's high tech and almost futuristic, isn't it? Really, compared to say the Gothic quarter of Barcelona. But I don't think it would have been quite the same impression as to Takashi Inui going to Eibar and being met with the the harshness of the rain and I don't think it's quite got the same effect.
I think from it, like an Iniesta and a Torres and a David Villa, for example, it is when, I suppose, any former celebrity goes to Japan, it is the swelling of hype that goes around them. Maybe from a more contemporary point of view, you look at Jesse Lingard when he left Manchester United to go to he left Nottingham Forest to go to Seoul in South Korea. The swarm. We spoke about the 12 Japanese journalists who followed Shoji Joe to buy the lead. it is the interest there that you know, you end up being plastered and everything. I remember being in Taiwan about 10 years ago and being shocked to find Michael Owen on posters everywhere. Still no idea why Michael Owen was on posters everywhere, but there he was. They just love their football out there. So I think this influx of Spanish superstars, yes, at the end of their career, but also, you know, still wonderful players in their own right. The fact that he chose to go to Japan was really quite interesting. So yeah, I'm all for it. To be fair, I'd like to see more Spanish players go over there. There are a couple still knocking about, to be honest, but maybe not as of the name levels. I'm looking at Juan Manuel Delgado, who's playing for Nagasaki at the moment. His former CV reads of Hearts of Midlothian and UCAM Murcia. But there is one chap who was out there who's currently playing in the Spanish third tier, as I mentioned to Paul, David Concha for Nacionalista Tarragona. So we get to speak about him on El Pozo. Had no idea he played in Japan. So it's been an education as well.
You can hit Liam with that factoid next season, can't you? Did you know that?
Yeah. This is former J League player David Concha. How do you know this thing? It's because we do our homework here at El Partido.
Yeah. Everybody knows
but
that.
Yeah, come on, keep up. But no, I think it's fantastic to put a bit of a microscope over some of these players and where they come from. And you know, Japanese players is such a fun construct to look at in terms of who they are, what they do, and I think anytime a club signs a player from Japan, there's been a couple today that have gone to teams in Germany in the transfer market, and the hype that's around them and the excitement that builds back home for them is just incredible. So I think it's definitely worth paying attention to. And you never know, maybe this summer we'll see another rising star arrive in Spain from Japan as well. So we'll wait with bated breath to who we talk about next. But we'll draw up there just before the hour. It's been a great episode to talk to you about, Paul, as well. And you've already mentioned we're going to try and do this about some more countries as well. And I think the more random, the better, I think would be quite fun. So, yes, I'll say thank you to you, Paul, for joining me this evening.
Thanks as always, Nick. It's always a pleasure.
Exactly. And just to let people know as well, with the Spanish football season may officially be over and done with on all levels, but we're going to carry on going because we're not bound by seasons. We're not bound by match days. We can talk about anything we want. So we'll be carrying on through the summer term. If you've listened to this as your first episode, we've got a wonderful back catalogue to go look at where you can learn more about Rafa Benitez, David Trezeguet, Hercules. We've done interviews with Miguel Pereira. We've got loads to go and listen to, so go back and do those. But for now, I'll say thank you very much, gracias, and hasta luego.